Welcome to tonight's story, where we journey into the mystical world of Alara and the secrets she uncovers. As you settle in, let the worries of the day fade away. Take a deep breath and allow the gentle rhythm of the story to guide you into a peaceful state of relaxation. Tonight, we'll follow Alara as she embarks on a quest that transcends time and space, uncovering ancient mysteries and facing the unknown. Close your eyes, let your mind drift, and allow the soothing sound of the tale to carry you into a restful sleep. The adventure awaits, and soon you'll be wrapped in the comfort of a dream. Sweet dreams are just around the corner. Chapter 1. The Amulet's Awakening. Alara stood at the edge of the ancient forest, the towering trees casting long shadows over the small village she had always called home. In her hands, she held a small, intricately carved wooden box, a relic passed down through generations of her family, always whispered about but never fully understood. The box was as old as the tales of the forest itself, and its contents had been shrouded in mystery for as long as Alara could remember. Her grandmother's passing had left a void in Alara's heart, a silence that echoed through the house they once shared. It was only in the stillness of that empty home that she dared to open the box, her fingers trembling with anticipation and a tinge of fear. As the lid creaked open, a soft glow emanated from within, illuminating the darkened room. Nestled in the center of the box, surrounded by faded velvet, lay an amulet, an object of undeniable beauty and ancient power. The amulet was wrought from silver, its surface etched with delicate, swirling patterns that seemed to shift and change as Alara gazed upon them. At its heart was a gemstone, the color of the twilight sky, pulsing with a light that seemed almost alive. Alara's breath caught in her throat as she lifted the amulet from its resting place. The air around her grew heavy with the weight of unspoken secrets, and she could feel a strange energy coursing through the metal, as if the amulet were a living thing. It felt warm to the touch, comforting and familiar. Yet it also carried an undercurrent of danger, like the calm before a storm. Her grandmother had always told her stories of their ancestors, tales of heroes and guardians who protected the world from forces beyond comprehension. But these stories were just that, stories, or so Alara had believed. Yet here, in her hands, was proof that the legends might hold a grain of truth. The amulet was no mere heirloom. It was something far greater, something tied to the very fabric of time itself. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting a crimson glow over the village, Alara felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to put the amulet around her neck. The moment the chain touched her skin, the world around her shifted. The walls of her home seemed to blur and fade, and the floor beneath her feet gave way to an endless void of stars and swirling colors. Ilara's heart raced as she found herself suspended in a vast expanse, the boundaries of time and space melting away. Visions flashed before her eyes, glimpses of distant lands, towering castles, and ancient civilizations long forgotten. She saw battles fought and lost, love stories that spanned centuries, and moments of profound change. But these visions were fleeting, slipping through her fingers like sand. Just as quickly as they had appeared, they vanished, leaving Ilara breathless and disoriented. When she finally came to, she was back in her grandmother's home, the amulet resting calmly against her chest as if nothing had happened. But Ilara knew better. Something had awakened within her, within the amulet, and it was calling to her. It was a call she could not ignore. Ilara knew deep in her soul that her life was no longer her own. The amulet had chosen her for a reason, though what that reason was she could not yet say. But she felt its pull, its desire to be used, to unlock the secrets it held. And Ilara, with a mixture of fear and excitement, realized that her journey was only just beginning. With the amulet's power coursing through her veins, Ilara stepped out of her home and into the night, the stars above twinkling like the echoes of forgotten eras. The forest whispered her name, and the wind carried with it the promise of adventure, a journey that would take her across time itself, through the ages, to discover the truth hidden in the amulet's glow. Ilara knew there would be no turning back. The path before her was uncertain, shrouded in mystery and danger. But with the amulet of time around her neck, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The past, present, and future awaited her, and she would meet them all with courage, for she was the keeper of the amulet, the heir to a legacy that spanned millennia. The village lay cloaked in the hush of early morning as Ilara made her way through the winding streets, the amulet heavy against her chest. She walked with purpose, her mind racing with the events of the previous night, the visions, the strange energy, the pull of the amulet. It all pointed to something far beyond her understanding. There was only one person who might have the answers she sought, the village's reclusive timekeeper. The timekeeper was a figure shrouded in mystery, an elder whose knowledge of the old ways and the secrets of time had made him both respected and feared. His home lay at the edge of the village, where the forest met the open fields, a small weathered cottage surrounded by ancient trees. Ilara had never been there before, but she had heard stories, whispers of visitors who sought his counsel, only to emerge changed, their eyes haunted by the weight of what they had learned. As she approached the cottage, the morning mist curled around her feet, and the air grew colder, as if the very atmosphere recognized the gravity of her purpose. The cottage itself seemed to blend into the landscape, its wooden walls covered in moss, the roof sagging under the weight of time. A single crooked chimney puffed out wisps of smoke, and the faint scent of herbs and old parchment drifted through the air. Elara hesitated at the threshold, her hand hovering over the door. She could feel the amulet's warmth seeping through her clothes, as if urging her forward. Taking a deep breath, she knocked, the sound echoing in the stillness. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the door creaked open, revealing the timekeeper himself. He was a tall, thin man, his face lined with age, but his eyes were sharp, bright with a keen intelligence that belied his years. His hair, once dark, was now streaked with silver, and he wore a robe of deep green, embroidered with symbols that Elara could not decipher. The timekeeper studied her for a long moment, his gaze lingering on the amulet. "So, it has chosen you," he said, his voice low and measured, as if each word carried the weight of centuries. Elara nodded, unsure of how to respond. She felt exposed under his scrutiny, as though he could see right through her, into her very soul. "Come inside," he said, stepping aside to let her enter. "We have much to discuss." The interior of the cottage was as ancient as the man himself. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books, scrolls and strange artifacts from distant lands and forgotten eras. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room, and a large round table sat in the center, covered in maps and parchments that seemed to chart the passage of time itself. The timekeeper gestured for Elara to sit, and he took a seat across from her, folding his hands on the table. "Tell me, child, what do you know of the amulet you carry?" "Very little," Elara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It belonged to my grandmother. She never spoke of it, but I felt its power the moment I touched it." The timekeeper nodded, as if this was to be expected. "The amulet is no ordinary relic. It is a relic from the Age of Origin, created by the first guardians to protect the balance of time. It is said to hold the power to traverse the very fabric of reality, to leap across eras, and even to alter the course of history itself." Elara's heart raced as she listened, the weight of the amulet suddenly feeling much heavier. "But why me? Why now?" "The amulet chooses its bearer," the timekeeper explained, his voice grave. "It seeks out those who are destined to shape the flow of time, those who can bear the burden of its power. Your grandmother was once its guardian, though she kept that secret well hidden. Now, it has passed to you, and with it, the responsibility to protect the timeline from those who would seek to corrupt it." "But how?" Elara asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know anything about time, or magic." The timekeeper leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You will learn, Elara. The amulet will guide you, but you must also be wary. Time is a delicate thing, and even the smallest change can have far-reaching consequences. There are forces in this world, dark forces, that would use the amulet's power for their own ends. You must be vigilant, for the fate of countless lives may depend on your actions. Elara felt a chill run down her spine, but she knew there was no turning back. The amulet had chosen her, and with that choice came a destiny she could not escape. She would need to understand its power, to master it if she hoped to survive the journey ahead. The timekeeper rose from his seat and walked to a nearby shelf, retrieving an ancient leather-bound tome. He placed it before Elara, the cover embossed with the same symbols that adorned the amulet. "This will be your guide," he said. "Study it well, for within these pages lie the secrets of the amulet and the path you must follow." Elara nodded, her resolve strengthening. She took the book, feeling its weight in her hands. It was the first step on a path fraught with danger, but also with the promise of adventure and discovery. As she left the timekeeper's cottage, the mist began to lift, and the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds. Elara knew that her journey was only just beginning, but with the amulet around her neck and the ancient tome in her hands, she felt a sense of purpose she had never known before. The future and the past awaited her, and she would meet them both with courage. The days that followed Elara's visit to the timekeeper were filled with an uneasy anticipation. She spent hours poring over the ancient tome he had given her, its pages filled with intricate diagrams and cryptic texts that seemed to shimmer with their own light. The more she read, the more she understood the gravity of her situation. The amulet was not just a tool, it was a key to the vast and perilous corridors of time. But understanding was one thing, using the amulet was another. The timekeeper had warned her that the first leap would be the most challenging, for it would determine her connection to the amulet and its power. Elara knew she had to be prepared, yet the uncertainty gnawed at her. What would she find on the other side? What dangers lurked in the past, waiting to test her resolve? The morning of the leap dawned crisp and clear, the air filled with the scent of pine and the distant call of birds. Elara stood at the edge of the village, the amulet warm against her chest, the tome clutched tightly in her hands. She had chosen a secluded spot in the forest, far from prying eyes, where she could attempt the leap without interruption. With a deep breath, Elara opened the tome to the page that detailed the ritual of the first leap. The words seemed to flow across the parchment like a river of ink, their meaning clear in her mind. She knelt on the soft earth, her heart pounding, and began to chant the incantation, her voice barely more than a whisper at first, but growing stronger with each word. As she spoke, the amulet began to glow, its light pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. The air around her seemed to thicken, as if time itself were gathering, preparing to bend to her will. The forest grew quiet, the very wind holding its breath as Elara reached the final words of the incantation. The moment the last syllable left her lips, the world around her exploded in a burst of light. Elara felt herself being pulled, as though by an invisible hand, into the heart of the amulet. Colours swirled around her, blues, greens, golds, until they blended into a seamless stream of light. She was no longer in the forest. She was hurtling through the corridors of time, the past and future blurring together in a dizzying dance. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the whirlwind of light and colour ceased. Elara found herself standing in the midst of a grand hall, the walls lined with banners of crimson and gold, the floor made of polished marble. The air was filled with the sounds of music and laughter, the clinking of goblets and the rustling of silk. She was in a castle, an ancient stronghold from a time long forgotten. But this was no place of peace. The tension in the air was palpable, and Elara quickly realized that she was in the middle of a celebration on the brink of disaster. The guests, dressed in the finery of a bygone era, were oblivious to the danger that loomed just outside the castle walls. A horde of invaders, driven by greed and a hunger for power, ready to strike. Elara's gaze was drawn to the throne at the far end of the hall, where a young prince sat, his expression troubled despite the revelry around him. This was the boy she had seen in her vision, the one whose fate was tied to the kingdom's survival. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, Elara knew why the amulet had brought her here. The prince, though barely more than a child, bore the weight of his people's future on his shoulders. The amulet's pull grew stronger, urging Elara forward, toward the throne and the boy who would either save or doom his kingdom. Elara! A voice echoed in her mind, deep and resonant. It was the voice of the amulet, a voice she had never heard before but instinctively knew. This is your first trial. The prince's fate is intertwined with your own. Protect him, guide him, and the path forward will be revealed. Elara swallowed her fear and approached the throne, the weight of her responsibility pressing down on her. She had no weapons, no army, only the amulet and the knowledge she had gleaned from the tome. But she also had something more: courage. The kind of courage that had driven her grandmother before her, and all those who had borne the amulet's power. As she reached the prince, the doors to the hall burst open, and the first wave of invaders poured in, their swords gleaming in the torchlight. The guests screamed, panic spreading like wildfire, but Elara stood her ground. The amulet flared with light, and she felt its power surge through her, connecting her to the flow of time itself. With a wave of her hand, Elara slowed time to a crawl. The invaders moved sluggishly, their swords cutting through the air as if it were molasses. She turned to the prince, who stared at her with wide eyes and spoke words of reassurance. "You must trust me," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "I am here to help." The prince nodded, his fear giving way to determination. Together they would face the trials ahead, and Elara would prove herself worthy of the amulet's power. As the world around them shimmered and shifted, Elara knew that this was only the beginning. The first leap had been made, but the journey through time was far from over. The castle faded like mist in the morning sun, and Elara found herself standing once more in the familiar woods near her village. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. The vibrant greens of the forest had been replaced by a landscape steeped in twilight. The trees, once full of life, now stood as twisted silhouettes against a sky that was neither day nor night, but something in between. A perpetual dusk. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and an unnatural silence hung over the land, broken only by the faint rustling of unseen creatures. Elara's heart sank as she realized this was no ordinary return home. She had changed something, unintentionally perhaps, but irrevocably. The timekeeper's warning echoed in her mind. Even the smallest change can have far-reaching consequences. The shadows, those remnants of the past she had unwittingly disturbed, had found their way into the present, and their presence threatened to consume everything she held dear. She hurried through the darkened woods, her footsteps muffled by the unnatural stillness. The village came into view, but it was not the place she remembered. Houses stood in disrepair, their once cheerful facades now crumbling and overgrown with thorny vines. The streets, usually filled with the sounds of life, were deserted, the windows of the cottages dark and lifeless. Elara's pace quickened as she reached the heart of the village, where she found the timekeeper waiting. He stood tall and unmoving, his expression as inscrutable as ever, but his eyes were filled with the sorrow that made Elara's heart ache. "What has happened?" Elara asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. "You have returned, but not to the world you knew," the timekeeper said, his voice a low rumble, like the distant echo of thunder. "The shadows that you encountered in the past have followed you here. They feed on the remnants of time, drawn to the disruptions you created. They are not of this world, yet they linger in it, corrupting all they touch." Elara looked around, her eyes wide with horror. The village was a mere shell of its former self, drained of its color and life. She felt the weight of the amulet against her chest, its warmth now a bitter reminder of the responsibility she carried. "Can I set it right?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Can I undo the damage I've done?" The timekeeper's gaze softened slightly. "Perhaps, but to do so, you must return to the past once more, to the very source of these shadows. They are drawn to the cracks in time, places where the fabric of reality is weakest. You must find the origin of the disturbance and seal it, or else the shadows will spread until there is nothing left." Elara nodded, determination replacing the fear that had gripped her heart. She would not allow her actions to destroy the world she loved. She would face the shadows, no matter the cost. The timekeeper handed her a small vial filled with a shimmering liquid. "This will guide you," he said. "Pour it upon the ground when you reach the place where the shadows first took form. It will reveal the truth hidden beneath the surface, and only then can you begin to mend the tear in time." With a solemn nod, Elara accepted the vial and turned back to the forest. The path ahead was unclear, but she knew that it led deep into the past, to an era forgotten by all but the shadows. The amulet pulsed with a faint light, a beacon in the darkness, and Elara took a deep breath, feeling its power course through her. She activated the amulet once more, whispering the words that would send her back through the corridors of time. The world around her blurred, the shadows seeming to close in as she slipped between the layers of reality. When the world solidified again, Elara found herself in a landscape she had never seen before, a place of barren earth and stone, where the sky was a sickly green and the air crackled with energy. The land was scarred, as though a great battle had taken place there long ago. And in the distance, she could see them, the shadows, gathering around a rift in the earth, a tear in the very fabric of time itself. Elara knew what she had to do. Clutching the vial, she made her way toward the rift, the shadows swirling around her like a storm. They whispered to her, voices from the past, voices of despair and loss. But Elara did not falter. She reached the rift and poured the liquid from the vial onto the ground. The earth trembled, and a brilliant light erupted from the rift, illuminating the shadows and forcing them to retreat. The light grew brighter, filling the sky and washing away the green hue, replacing it with the deep blue of a summer's day. The shadows were banished, their whispers silenced, and the rift slowly began to close, the land healing itself before Elara's eyes. As the last of the shadows faded into nothingness, Elara felt a profound sense of relief. The village would be restored and the timeline mended. But she knew that her journey was far from over. The amulet still pulsed with power, and its secrets had not yet been fully revealed. With the rift sealed, Elara felt herself being pulled back to her own time, the barren landscape dissolving into the familiar sights of her village. The sun was shining, the trees were green, and the birds were singing. Life had returned to the village, the shadows banished to the annals of forgotten history. Elara stood in the center of the village, the amulet glowing softly against her chest. She had succeeded in her first true test, but she knew that many more trials awaited her. She looked toward the horizon, where the sun was setting in a blaze of gold and crimson, and knew that the path ahead would not be easy. But she would face it with courage, for she was the keeper of the amulet, the guardian of time. And time, as she now understood, was a force that could not be tamed, but one that could be guided if only by the right hands. Ilara's victory over the shadows had restored the village to its former vibrancy, but her relief was short-lived. The amulet, now a familiar weight against her chest, pulsed with a new urgency, as if it were alive with anticipation. The timekeeper's words echoed in her mind. The journey was far from over. The rift had been sealed, but the amulet's power was not yet fully awakened. To master it, Ilara would need to face the trial of the ancients. The timekeeper had spoken of the ancients only in whispers, his voice heavy with reverence and fear. They were the original guardians of time, beings of immense power who existed beyond the mortal realm. It was they who had created the amulet, imbuing it with the ability to traverse and manipulate time. But their gifts were not given lightly. To wield such power, one had to prove themselves worthy by passing through a series of trials designed to test their very soul. Ilara knew that these trials would not be easy. She had already faced the dangers of the past, but this would be different. This would be a test of her character, her resolve, and her willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. Steeling herself, she activated the amulet once more, letting its power envelop her. The familiar sensation of being pulled through time returned. But this time, it was different, deeper, more intense, as though she were plunging into the very heart of the universe. When she emerged, Ilara found herself standing in a vast, ethereal landscape. The ground beneath her feet was a mosaic of shifting colours, as if the very earth were made of light. Above her, the sky was a swirling vortex of stars, galaxies, and cosmic dust, a reminder that she was no longer bound by the rules of the mortal world. This was a place outside of time, a realm where the ancients dwelled. Before her stood three towering figures, their forms both awe-inspiring and terrifying. They were beings of pure energy, their shapes constantly shifting and changing, as if they were composed of the very essence of time itself. Each one held a staff, symbols of their authority, and their eyes, if they could be called eyes, glowed with an ancient wisdom. Ilara, their voices echoed in unison, filling the air with a sound that was both a whisper and a roar. You have come seeking the power of the amulet, but power without wisdom is a dangerous thing. You must prove yourself worthy by facing the trials we have set before you. Only then will you unlock the true potential of the amulet. Ilara nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had come too far to turn back now. I am ready, she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at the edges of her resolve. The first of the ancients stepped forward, raising its staff. The trial of courage, it intoned. You will face your deepest fears, the shadows of your past and future. You must confront them, not with anger, but with understanding. Only then will you overcome them. Ilara felt a chill run through her as the landscape around her shifted, transforming into a dark, twisted forest. The trees loomed over her, their branches like claws, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. Before her, shadows began to take shape, figures from her past, twisted versions of herself, filled with doubt, regret, and fear. They taunted her, whispering her failures, her insecurities. But Elara stood her ground. She had faced the shadows before, and she would not be cowed now. She stepped forward, her hand resting on the amulet, and spoke to the shadows, not with anger, but with compassion. "You are a part of me," she said, "but you do not define me. I have learned from my mistakes, and I will not let fear rule my life." The shadows recoiled, their forms dissolving into mist, and the forest faded away, replaced once more by the ethereal landscape. The first ancient nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her victory. The second ancient approached, its voice resonating with the weight of ages. "The trial of wisdom," it said. "You will be faced with a choice, one that will test your understanding of time and its consequences. Choose wisely, for the future hangs in the balance." Before Elara, two paths appeared, each leading to a different future. On one path, she saw a vision of her village, prosperous and at peace, but the world beyond it in turmoil, consumed by war and chaos. On the other path, she saw a world united, at peace, but her village was gone, sacrificed for the greater good. Elara's heart ached as she contemplated the choice. She had fought so hard to save her village, to protect the people she loved. But she knew that she could not choose selfishly. She had to think of the greater good, the future of all people, not just those she held dear. With a heavy heart, she chose the path of unity, knowing that it would mean the loss of her home. The second ancient bowed its head, acknowledging her wisdom. The paths faded, and the third ancient came forward, its presence radiating power. "The trial of sacrifice," it declared. "The amulet demands a price. You must give up something precious to you, something you hold dear, to prove your dedication to the path you have chosen." Elara felt a tear slip down her cheek. She had already given so much. Her safety, her innocence, her home. But she knew what the amulet would ask of her. With trembling hands, she reached for the amulet, feeling its warmth one last time. She could sense its power, its connection to her, but she knew that to truly control it, she had to be willing to let it go. "I offer you my freedom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "My life, my future. I will bear the weight of time's burden so that others may live in peace." The amulet flared with light, and the third ancient nodded, accepting her sacrifice. The light grew brighter, filling the entire realm, until it was all-consuming. When the light faded, Elara found herself back in the village, the amulet still around her neck, but it was different now. It was lighter, its power more attuned to her own. She had passed the trials, but the price had been steep. The village was safe, but Elara knew that her journey was far from over. The ancients had tested her courage, her wisdom, and her willingness to sacrifice, and she had proven herself worthy. But the amulet's true power was still a mystery, one that she would need to unravel as she continued her journey through time. The sun set over the village, casting long shadows over the land. But Elara did not fear them. She was the keeper of the amulet, the guardian of time, and she would face whatever challenges lay ahead with the strength she had gained from her trials. The future awaited, and she was ready to meet it. Chapter 2: The Tides of Time. Elara awoke to a world that shimmered with possibilities. The trials she had endured left their mark, but they also granted her a deeper understanding of the amulet's power and the responsibilities it entailed. She could feel the amulet's pulse, more in tune with her now, a rhythm that echoed through the ages. It was as though she had become a part of time itself, a living conduit for its mysteries and its might. As she opened her eyes, the familiar sights of her village gave way to something entirely new. The first rays of dawn illuminated the spires of a grand city, their golden tips catching the light and casting it in all directions like a beacon of hope. Elara found herself standing on the edge of this city, its architecture a blend of ancient grandeur and vibrant innovation. The air was thick with the scent of incense and the hum of magical energy, as if the very fabric of reality was charged with possibility. This was no ordinary city. This was a place where magic and science intertwined, a renaissance of both mind and spirit. People dressed in flowing robes moved through the streets, their hands glowing with arcane symbols as they practiced spells or crafted inventions. Scholars and magicians alike worked side by side, their efforts pushing the boundaries of knowledge and power. The city was a hub of learning, a place where the future was forged from the past. Elara felt the pull of the amulet guiding her through the bustling streets. She passed workshops where alchemists transformed base metals into gold, laboratories where scholars bent light to their will, and amphitheaters where the mysteries of the cosmos were debated by the finest minds of the age. She could feel the weight of time here, as though the city itself was a nexus, a point where past, present, and future converged. But all was not as it seemed. As Elara walked deeper into the heart of the city, she sensed an undercurrent of unease. There was a tension in the air, a feeling that something was not quite right. The harmony between magic and science, so carefully cultivated, was beginning to unravel. Whispers of discontent and fear drifted through the crowds, and Elara could see the strain on the faces of those who passed her by. She soon found herself standing before a grand hall, its doors open wide in welcome. The amulet's pulse quickened, urging her inside. Within, she discovered a gathering of the city's most prominent scholars and magicians, their faces grave as they discussed a problem that had no easy solution. At the center of their discussion was a device, an intricate clockwork contraption surrounded by glowing runes. It was both beautiful and terrifying, a symbol of the city's greatest triumph and its greatest threat. As Elara approached, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to her, and she could feel the weight of their expectations. An elderly scholar, his robes lined with silver thread, stepped forward. His eyes, though clouded with age, sparkled with intelligence. "You must be the one the prophecy spoke of," he said, his voice filled with both hope and desperation. "The keeper of the amulet, the one who can bridge the gap between what is and what must be." Elara nodded, though she did not fully understand. "What is happening here?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "Why is the balance of this city so fragile?" The scholar sighed, his shoulders slumping under the weight of the knowledge he carried. "We have achieved wonders here, blending magic with the discoveries of science, but we have also pushed too far. This device," he gestured to the contraption at the center of the room, "was meant to harness the power of time itself, to give us insight into the future and control over the present. But in our hubris, we have torn a hole in the fabric of reality." Elara's breath caught. She understood the dangers of meddling with time all too well. The shadows that had plagued her village were but a glimpse of what could happen when time was disrupted. "What must I do?" she asked, knowing that the amulet would guide her, but also knowing that this challenge would require more than just its power. "The device must be stabilized," the scholar explained, "but we lack the knowledge to do so. The rift it has created is growing, and if it is not sealed, it will consume this city and perhaps even more. You, with the power of the amulet, might be able to mend the tear. But be warned, the forces you will face are unlike any you have encountered before." Elara nodded, determination settling over her like a cloak. She had passed the trials of the ancients, and now she would face the challenge of this new era. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, placing her hand on the device. The amulet flared with light, and she could feel the currents of time swirling around her, chaotic and unruly. She would need to focus, to harness her newfound connection to the amulet, and to draw upon the lessons she had learned. As she began to work, the room filled with a soft, otherworldly glow. The scholars and magicians watched in awe as Elara guided the flow of time, weaving it back together strand by strand. It was delicate work, requiring both strength and subtlety, but Elara's resolve never wavered. She could feel the rift closing, the balance beginning to restore itself. But just as she thought she had succeeded, a wave of dark energy erupted from the device, knocking her back. The rift, though smaller, still remained, and now it was resisting her efforts to seal it. Elara gritted her teeth, knowing that this was not just a test of her power, but of her will. she would not fail, not when so much was at stake. With renewed focus, she channeled all her energy into the amulet, feeling it respond to her determination. The light from the amulet grew brighter, overwhelming the darkness, and slowly, ever so slowly, the rift began to close. The chaotic energy subsided, and the device's glow dimmed to a soft, steady pulse. When it was over, Elara collapsed to her knees, exhausted but victorious. The rift was sealed, the city saved. But she knew that this was only the beginning of her journey through the tides of time. The renaissance of magic had been preserved, but there were still other eras, other challenges waiting for her. As she rose to her feet, the scholars and magicians bowed their heads in gratitude. Elara offered them a tired smile, knowing that she had done what she could for this time, for this place. The amulet's pulse was calm now, but she could feel it urging her onward. The next era awaited, and with it, a new set of trials that would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. The future was uncertain, but Elara knew one thing for sure. She would face it with courage, wisdom, and the power of the amulet by her side. And so, with a final glance at the city of magic and science, she turned her gaze to the horizon, ready to face whatever came next in the ever-changing tides of time. The city of magic and science faded into the mists of time as Elara activated the amulet once more. The pulse of its energy resonated with a deep, thrumming beat that echoed in her bones, guiding her to the next era. The world around her shifted, the colors and sounds blurring together until they dissolved into a stark whiteness that seared her vision. The air grew frigid, and the sharp bite of cold stung her cheeks as she emerged into a new time and place. Elara stood on the edge of a vast, frozen wasteland. The ground beneath her feet was a solid sheet of ice, and the landscape stretched out in every direction, a desolate expanse of white and grey. Above her, the sky was a pale, unforgiving blue, the sun a distant, cold orb that offered no warmth. The wind howled across the plains, carrying with it the taste of snow and the faint scent of something ancient and forgotten. She pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, her breath visible in the icy air. The amulet's warmth against her chest was a stark contrast to the chill that surrounded her, a small but comforting reminder of its power. But even the amulet's heat could not fully ward off the cold that seemed to seep into her very soul. As she scanned the horizon, Elara saw the outline of a structure in the distance, a massive fortress carved into the side of a mountain, its walls and towers gleaming with frost. This was the heart of the Frozen Empire, a once great civilization now buried under ice. The people who had built this empire had long since vanished, their history lost to the ages. But the amulet had brought her here for a reason. There was something within those frozen walls that she needed to find. With cautious steps, Elara began her journey across the ice, the wind whipping at her cloak and the snow crunching beneath her boots. The fortress loomed closer with every step, its sheer size and scale becoming more apparent. It was a place of both beauty and terror, its icy towers reaching toward the sky like the fingers of a giant, its walls etched with ancient symbols that glowed faintly in the twilight. As she approached the gates, Elara felt a presence watching her, a cold, calculating gaze that sent shivers down her spine. The fortress was not as empty as it seemed. The Empire's remnants, whatever they might be, were still very much alive, and they had noticed her arrival. The gates opened with a creak that echoed across the frozen plain, and Elara stepped inside. The interior of the fortress was a labyrinth of icy corridors and grand halls, all eerily silent and devoid of life. The walls were lined with statues of ancient warriors, their expressions stern and resolute, as if they were guarding the secrets of the Empire with their very souls. Elara could feel the amulet's pull guiding her deeper into the fortress, past rooms filled with frozen relics and forgotten treasures. The temperature dropped even further as she descended into the heart of the mountain, the air growing thick with the weight of time and memory. At last, she reached a massive chamber, its ceiling lost in the shadows above. In the center of the room stood a throne carved from ice, and upon it sat a figure clad in gleaming armor, his features hidden beneath a helmet shaped like the head of a wolf. This was the last king of the Frozen Empire, his body preserved by the cold, his soul bound to the throne by a curse that had kept him alive for centuries. The king's eyes glowed with a pale blue light as he regarded Elara, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical force. "Who dares enter my domain?" His voice echoed through the chamber, deep and resonant, like the cracking of ice. Elara stepped forward, her hand resting on the amulet. "I am Elara, keeper of the Amulet of Time," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at her. "I seek the truth of this empire and the power that lies within it." The king's laughter was a harsh, brittle sound, like the shattering of glass. "The power you seek is not something to be taken lightly, child. This empire fell because of that power, consumed by its own ambition and the cold that now grips this land. I am all that remains, a king without a kingdom, a soul trapped in a tomb of ice." Elara's heart ached with the weight of his words, but she knew she could not turn back. The amulet had brought her here for a reason, and she was determined to see it through. "I do not seek power for myself," she said, "but I must understand it so that I may protect the future from the mistakes of the past." The king's gaze softened, and for a moment, Elara thought she saw a flicker of sorrow in his eyes. "You speak with wisdom beyond your years," he said. "Perhaps there is hope yet for this world. But to claim the knowledge you seek, you must prove yourself worthy. You must confront the cold within your own heart, the doubts and fears that would freeze your resolve." As he spoke, the chamber grew even colder, the air crystallizing around Elara, forming a cocoon of ice that encased her in darkness. The cold seeped into her bones, numbing her body, and her thoughts became sluggish, weighed down by the heaviness of despair. She could feel the shadows of her own doubts and fears closing in, threatening to overwhelm her. But in that darkness, the amulet flared with warmth, a beacon of light that cut through the cold. Elara focused on that warmth, drawing strength from it, and she pushed back against the icy tendrils that sought to drag her down. She remembered the trials she had faced, the lessons she had learned, and the courage that had brought her this far. With a cry of defiance, Elara shattered the ice that encased her, the cold retreating in the face of her determination. The chamber filled with light as the amulet's power surged, and the king's figure began to dissolve, his soul finally released from its icy prison. "You have passed the test," the king's voice whispered as he faded into the ether. "The knowledge of this empire is yours, but remember, power must always be tempered with wisdom. Go and use what you have learned to guide the future." As the last echoes of the king's voice faded, Elara felt a flood of understanding fill her mind. She saw the rise and fall of the frozen empire, the mistakes that had led to its downfall, and the knowledge that could prevent such a fate from befalling others. The amulet pulsed with a steady, reassuring rhythm, its power now fully attuned to her own. Elara left the fortress, the wind howling around her as she stepped back onto the frozen plains. The sky above was darkening, but she felt a new light within her, a sense of purpose that would guide her through the challenges yet to come. The frozen empire was behind her now, but the lessons it held would stay with her always. She had passed another test, and the path forward was clearer than ever. The amulet had more secrets to reveal, and Elara was ready to face whatever lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that she had the strength to meet any challenge time might throw her way. The biting cold of the frozen empire gave way to warmth as Elara's surroundings shifted once more. The transition was smoother this time, as though the amulet, now deeply connected to her, guided her gently through the folds of time. When the world solidified around her, she found herself standing on the edge of a dense, verdant forest, the air rich with the scent of earth and the distant melody of birdsong. The forest was alive with vibrant greens and golden light filtering through the canopy. But there was an undercurrent of something ancient, something hidden beneath the surface beauty. Elara felt it in the stillness between the rustling leaves, in the way the light seemed to shift ever so slightly, as if trying to obscure what lay deeper within. The amulet, warm against her chest, pulsed with a gentle urgency, guiding her steps toward the heart of this mysterious place. She moved cautiously along a narrow path that wound deeper into the forest. The trees grew taller and older as she walked, their trunks thick with age, their roots twisting into the earth like the gnarled fingers of ancient giants. The further she ventured, the more the forest seemed to close in around her, the sunlight dimming as the trees grew denser. There was a sense of being watched, but it wasn't threatening. More a presence that observed her passage with quiet curiosity. At last, the path opened up into a small clearing, and Elara gasped at the sight before her. Rising from the center of the clearing was a grand, overgrown ruin. What had once been a palace of immense beauty, now reclaimed by the forest. Vines and moss covered the stone walls, flowers blossoming in the cracks, and a small stream flowed gently through the broken courtyard. It was a place of serenity and sorrow, the remnants of a kingdom lost to time. Elara felt the weight of history here, the echoes of lives long past. She could almost hear the laughter of courtiers, the music of long-forgotten festivals, and the whispers of a people whose legacy had been buried beneath the forest floor. The amulet's pulse quickened, urging her forward, and Elara knew that this place held something she needed to uncover, something vital to the journey she had undertaken. As she stepped into the ruins, the air grew cooler, and a soft mist began to rise from the ground, swirling around her feet. The once grand halls were silent now, the windows empty frames that looked out onto the encroaching forest. But despite the decay, there was still a sense of majesty, a lingering power that had not yet faded entirely. Elara walked slowly through the ruins, her footsteps echoing off the stone walls. She felt a strange connection to this place, as though she had been here before in another life, or perhaps in a dream. The amulet's glow became brighter as she approached the throne room, its light casting a soft golden hue over the faded grandeur of the palace. In the center of the throne room stood a single figure, a woman dressed in flowing robes of deep blue, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders like a waterfall of midnight. Her back was to Elara, but there was an air of familiarity about her, something that tugged at the edges of Elara's memory. The woman turned slowly, and Elara's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the face before her. It was like looking into a mirror, an older, more regal version of herself. The woman's eyes, a deep and knowing shade of green, locked onto Elara's, and a sad smile played at the corners of her lips. "You have come," the woman said, her voice a gentle echo that seemed to resonate with the very walls of the palace. "As I knew you would." Elara stared in shock. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "How is this possible?" The woman stepped forward, her movements graceful and deliberate. "I am who you will become," she replied. "Or rather, who you might have been, had the tides of time flowed differently. I was once the queen of this kingdom before it was lost to the mists of history. This place, this kingdom, was bound to the amulet just as you are. Its power was both our blessing and our curse." Ilara felt a chill run down her spine. What happened here? She asked. Why was the kingdom lost? The queen, her future self, sighed, a sound filled with regret. We sought to control the amulet's power, to use it to reshape the world according to our desires. But time is not something to be controlled, only respected. Our hubris led to our downfall. The kingdom was consumed by its own ambition, and I was left to wander these ruins, a ghost of what might have been. Ilara's heart ached with the weight of her words. She could see the echoes of her own journey in this lost kingdom's fate, the dangers of wielding such power without understanding its true cost. What must I do? She asked, her voice trembling. How can I avoid the same fate? The queen reached out, her hand brushing against Ilara's cheek in a gesture that was both comforting and sorrowful. You must remember that the amulet is not just a tool, but a living force. It responds to your intentions, your will. Use it wisely, with humility and respect for the natural order of time. You have already shown courage and wisdom, but the greatest challenge lies ahead. The choice of when to act and when to let time take its course. As the queen's words faded, so too did the vision before Ilara. The ruins dissolved into the mist, and the forest seemed to reclaim the space once more. Ilara was left standing alone in the clearing, the amulet's light now a soft, steady glow against her chest. She understood now that the amulet was as much a burden as it was a gift. The power it held was not just for her to wield, but to protect. The lost kingdom was a warning, a reminder of what could happen if she allowed ambition to overshadow wisdom. With a renewed sense of purpose, Ilara turned and walked back into the forest, the path ahead clearer now. She would continue her journey, guided by the lessons of the past and the power of the amulet, knowing that her choices would shape the future, not just for herself, but for all who came after. The lost kingdom was behind her, but its memory would stay with her always, a reminder of the fine line between power and destruction. The next era awaited, and Ilara was ready to face whatever trials it held, confident that she could navigate the tides of time with the wisdom she had gained. Ilara stepped from the forest of the Lost Kingdom and into a place unlike any she had ever known. The transition was seamless, the forest fading away as though it had never been, replaced by a vast expanse of silver light. The ground beneath her feet shimmered like polished glass, reflecting the infinite sky above, where stars twinkled in a dance that seemed to mirror the pulse of the amulet against her chest. This was a place between places, a realm where time held no sway, where past, present, and future intertwined in a delicate balance. Ilara knew instinctively that this was the heart of time itself, the domain of the weavers, those ethereal beings who maintained the balance of all that was and all that would be. As she walked across the shimmering surface, the air around her began to hum with a gentle, rhythmic melody. The sound grew louder, more complex, as if the very fabric of time was singing its own song. Elara felt a pull in her soul, a call to join in the dance. And as she moved, she realized that the steps were already known to her, as though they had been inscribed in her heart since the beginning of her journey. The light around her began to swirl, taking form, and Elara found herself surrounded by figures of light, each one a weaver of time, their bodies graceful and fluid, like threads of silver and gold woven into the very air. They moved in perfect harmony, their dance a living tapestry that wove together the strands of existence. Elara felt herself drawn into their rhythm, her movements mirroring theirs, as if she had become one with the dance of time. The weavers did not speak, but their presence filled Elara with a profound understanding. The eternal dance was not just a ritual, it was the essence of time itself, a continuous flow that connected all moments, all lives. To disrupt this dance would be to unravel the very fabric of reality, to bring chaos where there should be harmony. As she danced, Elara felt the amulet's power surge within her, resonating with the rhythm of the weavers. The images of her journey flashed before her eyes. The trials she had faced, the knowledge she had gained. Each step in the dance revealed new truths, deeper insights into the nature of time and her role within it. But then, the dance began to change. The weaver's movements grew erratic, the once harmonious melody fractured by dissonant notes. The stars above flickered, their light dimming as the balance of time wavered. Elara felt a tremor in the ground beneath her feet, as though the very foundation of this realm was beginning to crumble. The weavers turned to her, their eyes, if they could be called eyes, filled with a silent plea. They had maintained the balance of time for eons, but now something was disrupting the eternal dance, something beyond their control. Elara knew that it was up to her to restore the harmony, to mend the fractures before they tore the fabric of time apart. The amulet flared with light, guiding her steps as she moved through the dance, weaving in and out of the weaver's faltering patterns. She could feel the threads of time tugging at her, each one a moment in history, a life yet to be lived, or a memory long past. She reached out with her will, drawing these threads together, weaving them into a new pattern, one that would restore the balance. The dissonance grew louder, the tremors more violent, but Elara did not falter. She danced with a purpose, her movements deliberate and precise, guided by the knowledge she had gained from the trials of the ancients and the lessons of the lost kingdom. The weavers followed her lead, their movements synchronizing with hers, the melody slowly returning to its original harmony. With a final sweeping motion, Elara completed the dance, her body and soul fully attuned to the rhythm of time. The weavers paused, their forms shimmering with renewed light as the dissonance faded away, replaced by the gentle hum of the eternal dance once more. The stars above blazed brightly, the ground beneath her feet solid and sure. The weavers bowed to Elara, their gratitude a silent, profound presence that filled her heart. She had done it. She had restored the balance of time, mended the fractures, and ensured that the eternal dance would continue unbroken. As the weavers began to dissolve back into the light, Elara felt a deep peace settle over her. She had passed another test, one that had required not just power, but understanding, a true connection to the flow of time itself. The amulet's glow was soft now, a contented pulse that matched the steady rhythm of the eternal dance. The realm around her began to fade, the silver light giving way to the warm hues of a sunset. Elara found herself standing on a hilltop, overlooking a peaceful valley, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the distant murmur of a stream. The journey had taken her far, but she knew there was still one last challenge to face, the final convergence, where all the threads of her journey would come together. But for now, Elara allowed herself a moment of rest, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, knowing that she had done her part to ensure that time would continue to flow as it was meant to, through the ages, through the stars, and through the hearts of all who lived within its embrace. The future awaited, and Elara was ready to meet it, confident in the knowledge that she had become not just a keeper of time, but a part of its eternal dance. The peace of the sunset lingered in Elara's heart as she stood on the hilltop, but she knew this calm was but a brief respite before the greatest challenge yet. The amulet, resting against her chest, began to pulse with a new urgency, its light brighter than ever before. The horizon shimmered, and the world around her began to blur, the colors bleeding together until she found herself once again in the flow of time, carried by the amulet's power toward her final destination. When the world solidified, Elara was no longer on the hilltop. Instead, she stood at the center of a vast plain, where the sky was a swirling tapestry of gold and crimson, reflecting the burning sun that hung low on the horizon. The air crackled with energy, a palpable tension that thrummed through the earth and the sky, as if all of existence was holding its breath. Before her, the landscape began to shift and change, as if time itself was unraveling and reweaving at once. In the distance, Elara saw the familiar spires of the city of magic and science, the gleaming walls of the frozen empire, and the overgrown ruins of the lost kingdom. They flickered in and out of existence, as though caught between realities. It was as if all the places she had visited, all the eras she had touched, were converging in this one moment, this one place. Elara understood with a deep, instinctive clarity that this was the final convergence, the point where all her journeys through time would intersect. where the choices she had made and the knowledge she had gained would come together to determine the fate of the timeline. It was here that the true power of the amulet would be revealed, and it was here that she would face the ultimate test. As she walked across the plain, the ground beneath her feet trembled, and the air around her shimmered with heat and cold, light and shadow. The amulet's pulse grew stronger, and Alara felt the weight of all the lives she had touched, all the moments she had altered, pressing down on her. But she also felt the strength of those experiences, the courage and wisdom she had gained, bolstering her resolve. Suddenly, the landscape around her twisted, and Alara found herself face to face with figures from her past, echoes of the people she had encountered on her journey. The young prince from the war-torn kingdom, the scholar from the city of magic, the king of the frozen empire, and the ghostly queen of the lost kingdom. All stood before her, their eyes filled with expectation. But these were not just memories. They were manifestations of the choices she had made, the lives she had influenced. They were here to remind her of the power she wielded and the responsibility that came with it. They were also here to challenge her, to test her resolve one final time. "You have come far, Alara," the prince said, his voice still tinged with the innocence of youth, but carrying the weight of the ruler he would become. "But the path before you is not yet clear. The choices you make now will determine the fate of all time." The scholar stepped forward, his gaze piercing. "You have seen the power of knowledge and the dangers of ambition. But knowledge alone is not enough. You must understand the consequences of your actions, the ripple effects that spread through time." The king of the frozen empire spoke next, his voice deep and resonant like the cracking of ice. "You have faced the cold within your heart, but the true test is to wield power without being consumed by it. You must find the balance, or all will be lost." Finally, the queen of the lost kingdom approached, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. "You stand at the crossroads, where all paths meet. The past, present, and future are converging, and only you can guide them toward harmony. But beware. The wrong choice could unravel everything." Alara listened to their words, feeling the weight of their expectations. But she knew that this decision could not be made through fear. The amulet's power pulsed in time with her heartbeat, reminding her of the lessons she had learned, the strength she had gained. She had come too far to falter now. "I understand," Alara said, her voice steady. "I have seen what happens when time is disrupted, when power is misused. But I also know that time is a living force, one that must be respected and guided, not controlled. I will make my choice, and I will face the consequences, whatever they may be." The figures nodded, and as they did, the landscape around her began to shift again, the echoes of past and future blending into a single, overwhelming reality. The sky darkened, and the ground trembled, as if the very fabric of time was being stretched to its breaking point. Elara could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the decision she was about to make. The amulet glowed with a blinding light, and Elara raised it high, focusing all her will into its core. She could see the threads of time stretching out before her, each one representing a different path, a different future. Some were bright and full of promise, others dark and filled with despair. But Elara knew that she could not choose based on what she wanted. She had to choose what was right, what would bring balance to the timeline. With a deep breath, she reached out with her mind, guiding the amulet's power toward the thread that resonated most with her heart. It was a path of unity, one that would bring together the strengths of each era, the wisdom of each choice, into a single harmonious flow. It was not the easiest path, nor the one without sacrifice, but it was the path that felt true. The amulet's light flared one final time, and the world around her exploded into a cascade of colors and sound, a symphony of time converging into a single, perfect moment. Elara felt herself lifted, carried by the flow of time, as the past, present, and future aligned, the fractures mended, the balance restored. When the light faded, Elara found herself standing once more on the hilltop, the valley below bathed in the soft light of dawn. The amulet was still warm against her chest, but its glow had dimmed, its power now a part of her, a quiet strength that would guide her through whatever came next. The final convergence was over, but Elara knew that her journey was not. She had passed the ultimate test, but time was an ever-changing force, and there would always be new challenges, new choices to make. But she was ready. She was the keeper of the amulet, the guardian of time, and she would continue to dance through the ages, ensuring that the flow of time remained true. The sun rose higher in the sky, and Elara smiled, a deep peace settling over her. The future awaited, and she would meet it with courage, wisdom, and the knowledge that she had become one with the eternal tides of time.